Welcome to New York Bio's virtual breakfast series, a digital program bringing you fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode talks about how COVID has impacted clinical development with Katie McCarthy and Paola Murphy from Halloran Consulting Group.
All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Jennifer Hawks Bland, and I'm the CEO at New York Bio. And we're very excited that you're here with us for another edition of our virtual breakfast series. Special thanks this week to our partners at the law firm McDermott, Will, and Emery for being our sponsor. We have been very pleased to be able to work with them, and we know they work with a lot of New York Bio member companies as they grow and develop medicines. So today we are going to be having a conversation about leadership, clinical trials, leading through COVID. These are all all things that I think probably warrant a very good hour of discussion. And with that, oh, sorry, I almost forget my housekeeping. We love to have your questions throughout our conversation today. So please put those in either the chat or the Q&A box, and Derek and I will get to those throughout the course of our conversation today. So I will kick it over to Derek to do a more formal introduction of our amazing guests today.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And I think amazing is a pretty apt word here indeed. You're both terrific. I've known Lori Halloran and the Halloran Consulting Group for now probably going on almost 20 years. You guys are an amazing force in the industry. You've grown incredibly over the last decade, and you both are terrific. I mean, you've got just such terrific backgrounds throughout the industry, and you've both been at the group for over a decade and have been a huge part of that growth. So thank you so much for joining us. This is one of those times where I think we'll barely get in everything we'd like to get in within the hour. So we usually kick off with a bit of an origin story, and I'll have kind of each of you go a little bit separately, because I think both of your backgrounds bring kind of different things into the Halloran story. So Katie, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Derek. And good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having us today. Paola and I were so pleased to be asked to join, and also really happy to be doing this together. We are really proud of the work that we do at Halloran and really proud of the story of Halloran. So we're excited to talk a little bit more about that with you guys today. In terms of my background, I've been in the industry for, that 20 plus year bucket. And I've been with Halloran for about 10 years. I came from Biogen, where I spent 12 years. I really sort of grew up there, first in their clinical ops group, and then the clinical development team. Then I had a really big global team across multiple sites. And then I wanted to do something a little bit different. And one of the great opportunities at working at a company like Biogen is you can kind of shift and change your path really quickly. And so I moved into an organizational effectiveness role where I was chief of staff to the head of medical research. And that was during the time of the Biogen and the IDEC merger. So that was kind of my first entry into consulting, though I didn't really know it at the time. I got through that period, and then I moved over to program and alliance management and leadership. And prior to that, I was on the site side. I was a clinical study coordinator at Mass General Hospital, working in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's clinical trials under John Grouden, who's an absolutely unbelievable human being and neurologist. And, when I was looking for my next step from Biogen, I didn't really know what I wanted it to be, but I knew I wanted something different. I live in the Boston area, and we're so fortunate that there are a seemingly endless number of jobs. And every role that I looked into just sort of felt like it would be more of the same. And I really wanted to be able to do more, work across more therapeutic areas, work with different types of founders and investors, try to help more patients. That was really what I was after. And I had seen Lori Halloran speak, as most of us have. And she's incredible. She's so authentic. She just is who she is. And I remember I had just come from a training session where I was, sort of being told how I should stand and what I should wear and how I should hold myself during a presentation. And it felt so not authentic. And then I went to go see Lori and I was like, boom, this woman's incredible. She just is who she is. Like, I want more of that.
100% of the time.
Yeah. And it just totally resonated with me. And so I reached out to her cold. She had no idea who I was, and just started a conversation. And at the time, Halloran was really tiny. Paola had just joined, but there were like 6 people. I ended up joining first as an independent consultant. I sort of thought the whole thing was too good to be true. I stepped in and was like, I just want to lead programs and I want to help founders and, other executives take their products into and through the clinic and help generate really meaningful data so they know whether to take this program forward through development or kill it and invest all of the resources in something else that's waiting in the wings. And, that was totally when I joined. That was what I wanted to do. Paula and I have so many funny stories about, she and I both were like, oh, we don't want to do business development and we don't want direct reports. We just want to do the work. Flash forward now, I have 100 people on my team, and, Paula and I are both out talking to potential clients and the work we do all the time. But anyway, that was sort of my path to Halloran. Once I joined, I realized that it really wasn't too good to be true. I could do more in every sense of the word, and in a very fulfilling way. Work with a very different type of client, big, little, someone who wants to follow a typical path, someone that wants to do the impossible, and just really found a place at Halloran where, we've been able to partner with our clients to do incredible things and also grow Halloran's business in a way that's been very fulfilling to me personally. And I know we're going to dig into that in a little bit.
Oh, we'll get there. We'll get there. Well, Paula, why don't we kick over to you? And then then as you kind of come into the Halloran piece of the story, we'll kind of take it on from there. So I'll let you tell your own origin story.
Oh, thanks, Derek. I appreciate it. And good morning, everybody, too. And thanks again for letting us join here, too. We're excited to be here. So my story was similar to Katie's in the sense that I had actually been working in academic clinical research for many, many years. I had, just the honor to be able to work at some of those top research centers like NIH, Mass General, Boston Children's Hospital. And really there, I was able to see some pretty amazing cutting edge research, and I was at the forefront and it was so much fun. I loved clinical research, but I actually had not intended to get into clinical research as a profession. And then just over the years, it started to take shape. And then that's when I decided, well, you know what, I'm going to see the sponsor side of things. So I'm actually going to go for it and make a profession out of this too. And I really wanted to see the sponsor side because I was always working with sponsors at the hospitals. And I was like, you know what, it would be really cool to kind of experience how the products actually get made. And then that's where I landed at Boston Scientific. So I was there for probably about, 9 or 10 years. And I really got to be part of so many different areas of clinical research too. As Katie had mentioned, it was such a great opportunity. And I was part of definitely a lot of acquisitions, a lot of integrations, there, which was also a lot of fun. But then I was lucky enough to have had the opportunity to partner with some amazing leaders there. And they had actually joined and been working with Lori Halloran and said, hey, do you want to come in and start joining our group? And there's only 5 of us, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know how to do consulting. I'm like, who's going to listen to me, right? As a consultant. And then I met Lori Halloran, and I was like, you know what? I was like, oh my gosh, Lori had actually taught a course of mine at Boston University when I was getting my master's in public health. And I just remember seeing her, and I was the same way. It was sort of like our fearless leader was there. And I'm just so grateful to have been able to join and to be where I am now here at Halloran. We do just such amazing things in terms of working with some pretty cutting edge clients too, and just work alongside so many talented people, both internally and externally with our clients. So it feels just so nice to have that connection, you know, with our clients too. A lot of them are our friends, you know, and we keep them for life, really. So they stick with us. It's a great network, and we try and keep everybody together too.
Well, let's talk a little bit about growth, because you've both been at Halloran for a decade or more now. And I remember, way back when I was first introduced to Lori and to the company, it was really predominantly clinical trials, site management. It was basically not quite a CRO in a box, but kind of a CRO with a little bit more leadership. And then over the last however long, I think organic growth is the way that I think about it a lot, because you've added things that just seem smart. You've added things within people's capabilities, and you've added really kind of incredible dimensions to the team, but it's never seemed forced, right? It wasn't like all of these people showed up with brand new capabilities. That all seems like a very logical progression. So can you talk about a little of the ways that you've grown over the last 10 years?
Sure, I can kick it off, Paula, and then hand it over
That's
to
great.
you. So when Paula joined, there were maybe 5 or 6 people. When I joined, I was maybe 7 or 8. And at this point, we're sitting close to 150 people, all as full-time employees. That growth has not always been steady. We stayed fairly small for the first several years, and then probably over the last 4 or 5 years, we've grown much more rapidly. And our growth has always been completely tied to the need from our client base, and both in size and sort of capacity, but also in our capabilities. So we used to, as you mentioned, Derek, do a lot of quality work, clinical operations work, a little bit of regulatory work. But the way in which we partner with clients now has evolved greatly. We love now to be sitting at the table, really helping to solve hard problems, where a company may have an idea that they want to do something better or different. And we're part of that discussion, that brainstorm, that dream of what could be possible. And then we make it possible. And for us, that's just been a really fun place to be. My team, so I lead all of the consulting practices that we have at Halloran. And we have several large practices now. We have a regulatory practice, we have a clinical practice, we have an strategy and program leadership practice, and we have a organizational and quality solutions practice. And together, those practices really partner with our clients on both the strategic vision and the execution of that vision, really from end to end, that sort of preclinical through commercial space, focusing on assets and pipelines in the delivery and the development of those assets. And, the organizations, how should organizations be evolving and growing and preparing for, their success? And how can they do things differently? And, what are some of the ways that we can be making the development of assets, more seamless, more effective, easier for patients, easier for physicians, just, better across the board.
So
go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we had a question from the audience, and then I actually have a follow-up. But I think this is the right time for the audience question. Since both of you came from public health, clinical trials background, do you have people at Halloran that came from the more of the bench science background or other different diversity, backgrounds? So how have you gone about, I'm going to take it a little step further. How have you gone about building out the types of talent that your clients need?
Sure. So that's a great question. I mean, so one of the beautiful things about our team is that we're often not looking for a specific type of person. We broadly know where we want to grow from a capability perspective, and we know, where we want to kind of fill some of our gaps from a capacity perspective. But, one of the cool things about Halloran, it was this way when I started, and it's still this way today. If we meet someone and we see the possibilities, we'll bring them on board. If we see a way that their special skills and experiences can really add value to our clients and really to the life science industry as a whole, we find a way to utilize that and share that with our talent, with our clients.
Yeah, and one of the things too, just to add to that, is there's a lot of like soft skills and sort of the leadership skills that go behind the person's sort of, CV and direct, technical experiences. And we really try and focus in on kind of lifting the hood up and really getting behind those soft skills. And what Katie had mentioned was that kind of learning agility is a big component of what we look for in consultants, because you can a lot of times learn some of the other technical areas and you sort of lean on your experiences, but it's sort of the differences and the diverse experiences of our team that collectively make us strong. And so we're always also, one of the valuable lessons that I've learned over the years just working at Halloran is we have to recognize each other's strengths. We all position each other, and even within our executive team to work to our strengths. And so we lean on each other and each of our strengths. And we recognize that maybe we don't have certain strengths like an operational, execution or something. So we lean on somebody else to give that to us. So consulting is not an easy job at all. I'm not going to sugarcoat it at all. It's really hard work because there's just so many clients, there's so many different experiences. Not one problem is ever the same. Not one client is ever the same. So we value each other's sort of, and work together as a team. So you certainly, I think to that question, you can have a bench, technical experience. It's kind of everything else around it that makes for a good consultant.
So I think this is a really great transition because you talk a little bit about how your team kind of leans on each other for different things. And I think one of the things that we talked about in the run up to this is that you do have a dynamic executive team. Your team is entirely made up of women. And I think you guys have done a pretty amazing job of building. So talk a little bit about the actual personal side of that, right? So what are some of the examples of places where either of you just have kind of made that personal side work, either places where you've leaned on other people on the team, or put that kind of stuff in context, because that's to me where some of the really interesting stuff is in terms of like how the team got to be where it is.
Sure. Yeah. So our story is really special. And, all of us who are now sitting on the executive team, and as Derek mentioned, there are 5 of us, including Lori Halloran, our founder and CEO, and we are all females. We'd never really intended for it to be this way. It wasn't Lori's vision to have this all-female executive team, but it's where we've landed, and it's really fantastic. Each of us have been here for about 10 years or so, some a little more, some a little less. And so we've really grown up at Halloran, and there have been so many ups and downs. There's a lot of history that is probably better served with a glass of wine at some point, but
it's a coffee show, Katie. It's a coffee
exactly.
show.
So I won't get into it now, but I think what Paula mentioned, that ability to lean on each other, recognize strengths and weaknesses is really like the secret sauce to our executive team. We're not like, there's not one woman who's like the person who is in charge of everything. We all have the areas that we cover. We also have, strengths and, I think you have the dreamers on with you today, Jennifer and Derek. So Paula and I could spend, days, weeks, months, really seeing the possibilities. Paula often sees the possibilities when she's talking with clients. I see the possibilities about where we could go from a business perspective, or how we could utilize some of the talent that we have on our team, how they can grow, how they can add value. I think, we are so thankful every day to have our counterparts, Tanya Zizia, who's our CFO, and Brittany Sipos, who's our head of operations. They are our amazing teammates with their feet planted firmly on the ground.
And the rubber meets the road, folks, right?
Yes, yes.
What was it like? I mean, you started as an independent consultant, right? I mean, what was it like to go from, the member of the member of the team with your hands dirty, so to speak, to now having 100 people under you, right? So that's a bit of a sea change, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what it was when I first joined. My kids were really little, and I was, a busy mom, and I have a fantastic husband who plays a big role in all of this, because he's like, we are partners in crime across all things at home. But I don't know, I wanted to be a mom, and I wanted to have my career. And I thought if I went in too deep at this little company, I wouldn't be able to have both. And so I was like, I'm just going to be an independent consultant. I'm going to do my thing. That's going to be very personally fulfilling to me. And I'm going to be feeling like I'm, playing my part in improving human health. But then once I got a little taste of Halloran and saw what we could be, how we could continue to grow, both from an internal team perspective and from a how we can interact with clients perspective, I just wanted more. And, it was a couple of months, and I went to Lori and I was like, I'm all in, I saw where we could go. I have so many friends that sit in other sponsor companies, and, just conversations with them, I would see their problems. I would see their gaps, not even looking for business, but I, just instantly think, ooh, we could help you. And here's how, and here's what I'm seeing. And, it was just this very natural way of growing the business and our team. And, 10 years ago, I never would have thought we'd be sitting at 150 people across the company. But there's a need. And, we sort of feel like it's our duty to grow, to be able to serve the industry and to provide this expertise and talent to really, help all of these patients and these companies that are striving to bring products to patients.
We also too, it's not just us, right, leading the charge. We have some amazing leadership that we've been able to have here at Halloran. And so they really help us grow. I mean, they help us do what we do, right? I always say too, like, we hire smarter people than us, to kind of tell us what to do. So it's really impressive, I think, just the leadership that we do have, that's all committed to the same common mission for us here at Halloran, but also too with our clients. We spend a lot of time in communication and transparency. And it's not just communication for communication, it's the transparency piece that's extremely important, I think, to make us successful. We host, at the end of each week, we do these weekly wrap-ups where each time, we share some lessons learned from the week too. We provide some visibility into company initiatives. We do a lot of needed, much needed shout outs and praises to the team for a job well done. We start showcasing some of our core values and our team members really exemplifying those core values with real life examples and things like that. We do quarterly, monthly business reviews. we at the executive team, we meet probably about twice or 2 or 3 times a week, just quick, half-hour check-ins, just, making sure everything's in order and that we can resolve any issues quickly. So it's really, really important for us to, I think, stress the way that we've been able to grow and sort of bring up to an amazing leadership team, I think is also through the communication and transparency that we try and instill.
And I know you all have done, I mean, you do work all over, right? And the Boston market, where you certainly started, is different, right, than New York. And so we have just different variances, right, with our market in New York. And we had a question from the audience. As you probably are aware, New York has a very high concentration of nonprofit organizations that work on disease-specific, right, areas. And so the question is from that realm. It says nonprofit organizations in the healthcare space are expanding their role in development of therapies. For example, venture philanthropy funding for biotechs by sponsoring clinical trials, and in some cases, conducting the development work, right? Some cases actually filing with the FDA. Does Halloran have any experience working with the nonprofit sector? And if you do, how is that different? And how do you approach that differently from working with a for-profit pharma or biotech company?
So we do work a lot for nonprofit too organizations. It's something that's special to a lot of us too internally here at Halloran. There's just such amazing research and science happening in the nonprofit sector. What we do a lot, the services a lot of times are a little different in the sense that with our nonprofits, we do a lot of more educational too aspects of the work, when we provide sort of regulatory strategy or some early clinical strategy discussions too for some of those earlier stage clients. And so we spend a lot of time even, with ourselves. We're so active in the industry too, with a lot of marketing events and things like that, but we do a lot of training sessions too for our partners there as well. And then we usually stay with them, as they grow and as they sort of then start forming up, their own company. Pretty exciting to be at the forefront. We do enjoy it quite a bit. We have a lot of folks who focus in on the early science, pieces of things to really help and mentor those clients. It is different from some of the pharma side of things where they already have potentially a bigger team set up. They already have a pipeline view into, multiple different indications, for example, that they may want to go after. So the services a lot of times are a little bit different in those regards, but yeah.
But I think the approach is similar in that, one of the first questions we always ask is, what are you trying to achieve? Where are your problems? How can we help you? What's keeping you up at night? Those same basic questions so that we can really get into the heads of those who are looking for some additional leadership support expertise. And, because we have such a fantastic bench of consultants, we're often able to really bring the expertise that's missing, whether it be supplementing, training, really coaching, whatever it may be. We often have the people available and ready to jump in.
One of the things too, that I just to add as well is, we connect our network together. We host several Halloran meetings to share our learnings, but also to have our clients share with each other. So even if you're in the nonprofit sector, or in the for-profit sector, we all learn from each other. It's something that I know Lori is really important to Lori, and it's really important to all of us. And so we just try and keep everybody together in that way.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk a little bit about how COVID affected things, because this is actually a great transition. You've done kind of in-person meetings in the past. You guys were just at Convergence at the end of last week. So talk a little bit about really the last 2 years of going from in-person to completely virtual, and kind of what that's meant, both from a connectivity standpoint and from a leadership standpoint. It'd be also interesting to know how many people on your team you've never actually met in person before.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
well, that's now a thing, right? There are a lot of people
for
that are like,
sure.
yeah, I have this whole new team. I've never met them.
I heard at Convergence, somebody said that they hired I think 1,000 people since COVID. 'Cause they had opened up a lab or something like that.
Yeah.
They were hiring like, and they had never met like 1,000 people in their company at first. It's crazy.
And the crazy thing
That's
is
a lot
now
of people.
when you see the person that you develop a relationship over Zoom, you're like, oh, like either like you're tall or you're short. I mean, like you
You're
just,
taller than I
it's
thought
like,
you were.
I'm like, yeah, this is, you only know someone from here up.
Yep, exactly. No,
Yeah,
Katie, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead if you want.
No, not at all. Yeah, I mean, the pandemic has been really interesting for us. We had a bit of a leadership shift in the beginning of the pandemic, where our COO transitioned out of the company. That was hitting right about at the time that the pandemic was really taking off. So it was a bit of a, all hands on deck moment where, again, it ended up being a really incredible time for our company in a really good and meaningful way. I think in terms of the way that we work together within Halloran, it didn't actually shift all that much. We did shut down our office very early on, but many of our consultants are home-based. We have employees across, I think we're up to 27 different states in the US. We really have always been focused on working from wherever you work best, from wherever you can be a good colleague to your internal team, a good partner to your clients, and a good you for your family, your life, all of the things that kind of fill you up. So that transition to working from home really didn't make a big impact, other than to people like me that feel sort of stifled by being in the same place every day, where it felt like Groundhog Day. And I was like, I just need to go to an office or get on a plane or do something. But that part of it was
Find
easy.
yourself wandering around a WeWork on a Tuesday just to feel like you're around other people.
In terms of, the client side, Paula, I'll hand that over to you, because we really mobilized our network and did some pretty cool things during that time.
Yeah, as soon as the pandemic hit, like we knew we had to shift gears quickly for our clients. We started these virtual town halls every week where we shared whatever lessons we were learning at the time in real time as we were working with clients. And we had our clients talking about how they were addressing all the challenges of running clinical trials in real time. And it was just so great to see how everybody was so open, and also how our clients were embracing innovation, and they were moving quickly to embrace innovation. And this is where there was like that whole big aha moment in the industry saying, oh my God, this is possible. We can make some changes.
Yeah.
And nobody wanted the momentum to stop. And so to this day, we're still hosting our virtual town halls, but we're still also pushing strong with our events and sort of, with the really trying to make sure that the industry is not moving backwards, and that we're continuing to say, you can do this, you can share these things. When I was at Convergence, there was a Dr. Jane Morgan who was talking about, she was heading up, she works over at Piedmont Healthcare, and she said that all of the CEOs from all of the healthcare centers, sort of in the area, were getting on weekly, if not like daily calls, just sharing real-time information. And she said it was like, you open things up that used to be so secret, and you used to have these firewalls, right, with healthcare, where nobody would share anything, to now like having just a free, open discussion, because everybody was trying to kind of make some changes quickly.
Figure it out.
Yeah. I feel like the clinical trials industry literally just kind of threw open its doors, right? I remember we had, I think Lori and Craig on early on in the pandemic, and we talked about really, what was happening in terms of decentralized trials and everything like that. And I think the way that it was put was that every single clinical trial was immediately thrown into crisis with the pandemic. And, I think when faced with that, companies found a way to I guess to solve the problems really, because it was always very easy to kind of highlight the things that could be problems with a decentralized trial.
Yeah.
But when you're forced into it and say, well, this is what we have now, collectively, I think the industry did a pretty good job of figuring it out. Also, the Decentralized Trial Alliance that Craig and Amir and that team put together went from not existing to having seemingly, all of the members. They went from 0 to 100 members in what feels like about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But I feel like the clinical trials industry stood on its head very, very quickly. And like you said, there was a lot of sharing, there was a lot of openness in terms of this is how we are dealing with this.
Yeah. And I think it's sort of like we're feeling like finally, right? I mean, finally people are coming together, and finally we're able to really implement decentralized trials. I mean, we talked about this a lot at Convergence last week. During the pandemic, patient access to trial sites was decreased by 80%. 80%. And obviously there were trials ongoing. There were trials that were ready to launch. There were patients who needed access to these treatments. Something had to be done. And I think, the way the industry mobilized to really preserve patient safety and data integrity, we saw it work. So again, I sort of feel like it's up to us now as an industry to continue to make things easier for patients, make things easier for site teams, and really bring decentralized trials into our everyday of clinical trials.
I think one of the early fears was that people would cut corners, right? And be like, oh, now that we've lifted up some of these things and we're operating in an environment that could have been slightly looser than it was before, I think there was some fear that people would either skirt regulations or cut corners or things with their trials. I don't think we've seen that.
No, certainly not. I think what we are seeing, though, for sure, is definitely not cutting corners, but I think there's a couple things that we're seeing. One is that data is now becoming much more liquid in the industry. There's no more silos between healthcare and companies that we're seeing too. It's kind of opening up the door. There's a lot of data partnerships that are going on now to accelerate development. So it's more about finding now creative ways and ways in which we can leverage data to accelerate development, find better ways to actually run trials than the traditional sort of long, kind of trial way. The ways to use real world data to combine traditional trial designs and speed development timelines, require less patience, maybe even, and sort of find ways to do this now. We heard at the Convergence meeting too, there's just the way in which now data is being shared, and some of these also unique data partnerships are taking shape too, is pretty impressive. So innovation is fast and great. You have to be able to access the data, but also leverage technology to give you that access that you need, and that mobility to think about things and do things differently. There was also, we host these core meetings all the time, these clinical operations retreat for executives. And one of the things that we saw there as well is technologies that are popping up where they're taking advantage of the data to simulate trial modeling up front. And so it helps you think about now new creative ways of doing trial design and unique study designs, leveraging AI-based endpoints and population. They're discovering ways in which we can look at endpoints and populations, within our trials in a different way, right? Which is impressive.
So, go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh, I was gonna say, and especially given your background, right, with the academic medical centers, how did academic medical centers play a part in this, right? Because they were almost entirely preoccupied, at least on the care side, with COVID response early on. And so how did they partner with sponsors and companies like yours to try and accelerate that at the same time while providing care to a lot of COVID patients?
There's a couple things too. So there's a lot of collaborative research going on too. between sponsor and academic healthcare centers, because they have come together to really try and maximize and optimize the opportunities for research, and accessing patients. The other thing that we're seeing too is just the access to patients. Now we're seeing a lot of site networks too take rise now in this day and age. And so we're actually being able to access more sites in different ways and access directly to the patients, than ever before.
And more patients as well. I mean, there's a stat that's thrown around a lot where 70% of patients live more than 2 hours away from trial sites, right? So if we can really implement decentralized trials in a meaningful way, we know that patient enrollment tends to be a critical path item to bringing products to patients, right? If we can access more patients globally that live in very remote places, we can both enroll trials more quickly, and we can also, potentially have greater diversity across our trial participants, which is also what we need.
Yeah. And we saw that too. I mean, what's interesting is the academic health centers, they were the ones who were felt, I think, hit a lot really hard when it came to clinical trials, sort of taking a pause, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
we had to now look at different ways to actually get patients the access to the trials that they needed too, for sure. And now you see companies collaborating with health clinics like the CVS's of the world, to reach more patients than ever before. So it's pretty impressive, I think, where the industry is going.
Can I ask a little bit about, we've talked about data silos and data for companies and data for health systems. So do you feel like the shift to kind of patients being involved in and or kind of owning their own data, do you feel like that's real? Do you think we're actually going in that direction? Because ultimately, we think about patient data and we think about a number of things, but one of the things that we've seen come up over and over again in our discussions on this program is how the patient is involved in their own healthcare and how the patient is actually now becoming a more integral part of the innovation spectrum.
For sure. What was so interesting is before the pandemic too, you heard about all these kind of silos, right? And patients were experiencing that themselves as they went from one hospital to another specialist right, to get care. It wasn't easy for them. They would have to keep track of their own sort of journey, right? Their own data journey, if you will. Now it's sort of opening things up and now taking another look from the patient's lens around, let's get the patient to actually have true access across the board to their own data, and also to have their physicians too, right? Have access to all the data across the board as well. And it's just becoming much easier now with the advent of technology too. So we're actually seeing a big push on both sides, right? Yeah. More data access and data transparency.
And that patient voice, is really being considered much earlier on in development now. This is another one of those finally, examples where, patient advocacy groups and the patient voice, our client companies really do want to listen and have, patients engaged as part of the discussion from the earliest time, to really understand what is meaningful, what is feasible from a trial perspective. For so long, the protocols have been driven by the scientific questions, and obviously those are really important, but the patient is now being considered along with those scientific questions, which is right. Really transformative. It's fantastic to see that happening.
Yeah, you see now the advent also of a lot of patient advocacy groups too, partnering very closely with sponsor companies more than ever, to really get that patient voice incorporated early on in the study designs. And it's totally taken, there's new roles that are being created within companies specifically focused in on patient engagement, on partnering with patient advocacy groups and building that up for us. And so I mean, certainly there's a long way to go still. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and
Yeah.
say we're here. And, on the data side and on the patient engagement side for sure, but at least we're moving in the right direction.
I think we've
No,
heard
I mean, we've seen,
I was gonna say patient centric for a long time now, but I think you're starting to see companies also talk about burden of disease, burden of care, right? As they evaluate how, not only how they're going to develop their treatment, but how the treatments actually will be handled within the family, right? Because it's
Yeah.
a lot of times with disease, it's also about caregivers as well.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Yep. People are looking at the more complete picture, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, we think about this a lot, and we've kind of heard that call as growing more and more over the last few years. Last year, we started our first ever patient engagement summit, really to include advocacy groups, include foundations, and a number of other organizations, and specifically to include patient voices in what we're doing. So it's one of those areas where I think early on, as clinical trials were becoming more decentralized, as people were actually listening to patients, I think one of the big kind of underlying fears was, okay, the door is open now, but as things get better, does the door close again? Do you see any kind of pullback, not so much on the patient side, but either on the trial side or on the regulatory side, where people are, kind of even starting to bend back towards the way it used to be?
So that was another big topic at Convergence last week, where, there was a pretty consistent voice. A lot of the participants are CEOs, founders, very executive level folks who are a little bit away from the decisions around implementing decentralized trial approaches. And, the message that I think participants got loud and clear was support your clinical team, encourage them to be taking steps to meet patients where they are and really implement a different way of doing this. It may seem like there's a hit to cost or timeline at the very upfront stages, but that will pay off in the long run. So I think, I think to answer your question, Derek, I see that as a possibility for people to just say, oh, we'll go back to doing it the old way. It's what we know. We have a process for this. It's already worked out. I have a milestone I have to hit. But I think we've got to all stand up and not let it happen.
I think too, I would say, Derek, also just to add is, it's a great question. I think initially we had a fear that things were going to go back, that people were kind of starting to kind of transition back. But what we're seeing now, and as Katie had mentioned too, like even at Convergence, is I think we are seeing momentum to keep pushing forward. So I don't see us going backwards. Now, I'm also, happy to say that I think the regulators too, and some of the regulations, that FDA and some of the guidelines that are coming out are encouraging us to move forward. So there's a lot more coming out around, sort of including the patient voice, right, into early research and sort of encouraging those patient advocacy groups from being involved early on too. They also are encouraging, coming out with a lot of guidelines around decentralized clinical trials and how they should be run and how they're encouraging them. They're coming out with a lot more too guidelines around risk-based approaches to clinical research, right? So stop going back in the old way around doing, everything from 100% monitoring and capturing every little piece of information, that you can. Let's focus more on like a risk-based approach and strategies. And so they are helping, I think, to keep the momentum moving in the right direction as well, which is great, because I think without that, we may have seen maybe more of a slip, but we're certainly see it. There's also guidelines out there that are coming out very frequently around the use of real world evidence and looking for creative ways too, to accelerate development through different study designs. And so that it's very promising, I think, in that way.
I would say that the real world evidence point is one of the biggest things that we've seen. I mean, we had an entire discussion at our annual meeting on how real world evidence is affecting development. And the interesting thing there was most of that discussion was spent on specific cases where it matters. Either it was I think one of them was pneumonitis in PD-L1 and PD-1 therapies. These are really specific examples rather than, yeah, I'll say hand waving around, and not to pick on this, but hand waving around data in silos and everything. You can talk about that stuff in a utopian manner, but it seems like now we're actually getting to the point where there are real use cases for these, and we're actually taking data that, you know, does impact what the patient feels, what kind of, you know, how quickly we actually think about or talk about side effects, or, you know, how we're actually able to stratify patients and genuinely understand what's happening.
Yeah, that's great. Great.
So what do you think what are kind of the biggest things that you think we could see in the next, say, 5 or 10 years? You know, we've actually gotten to the point where it's fair to ask, I think, okay, how quickly can we enroll a cardiology trial? Or, you know, how many people can we actually get, you know, a cell therapy to if they live 2, 3, 4 hours away from an academic medical center?
I think in the next you said 5 to 10 years? Is that what your
Sure.
question? I would say, I think AI.
Pick a window, any window, it's fine.
You know, back to the data point. I mean, I think AI-based technology, it has just started to sort of surface. I think we're going to see it as part of the norm. When we get into drug discovery, when we get into trial designs, you know, when we get into the use of data in the real world setting, I think AI is going to be, you know, sort of the wave of the future, hopefully. By then.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this was also a big topic last week, right? I mean, we're wearing Apple watches or some sort of, you know, and this can do so much, right? And the way we're utilizing the possibility of, you know, these types of technologies and so many others, we're just at the tip of the iceberg. And I think,
yeah,
you know, we've got to lean in, and I think we really will over the next 5 to 10 years to, again, just change our model, change the approach that we've been relying on for so long in terms of how we collect data, how we, you know, really look at the conduct of clinical trials from start to finish. I think it's going to be a really fun ride where, you know, in 5 to 10 years, hopefully we're going to be living a completely different model that is faster, more efficient.
Exactly. Yep. I also think too that you see it now. There's companies out there that are not traditionally right in the healthcare or life sciences space, coming into life sciences and taking and having some pretty significant impacts in terms of how we run trials or how we access patients. So like the Apple Healths of the world, you know, using apps and wearables. I think we're going to see a lot more of that integrated into our research. You see, like I said, you know, the CVSs of the world, the Walgreens, you know, sort of these health clinics too, supporting and accessing more patients. I think you're going to see a lot more of that too in the next 5 to 10 years for sure. Yep. So it's going to be different, but it'll be fun.
And then you also have, and then I don't know if it's complicating or complementary, that you have what we would consider today sort of the anecdotal, right? Like the Apple, I'll turn it to the camera, right?
Yeah.
The Apple Watch or my Oura Ring, or I did a 2-week Levels Health continuous glucose monitor, right? So right now it's anecdotal because I'm kind of just doing it for, you know, I'm interested, right? To see this health data about myself, but it's not going into a repository that I have selected in order to do something with that data. So how do you think that's going to get captured in a way that it's utilized, it can be utilized?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is there's a lot of innovation happening collectively with sponsor companies and companies like Apple Health. They're not working in a silo. They're working together to maximize and optimize the use of that data. And so what you see is sort of the technologists, you know, the technologies that are actually trying to meet the sponsors and address their needs, you know, more actively. And so I think you're going to see a lot more in terms of being able to access that data and make it much more meaningful and powerful, you know, on that front. I mean, it was just like there was somebody at Convergence too who was talking about how simple it is to have now like an EKG monitor, you know, on your Apple Watch. But it's something so simple And yet, like, we make it into like this big thing, right? So there's still a lot more to do. And I think we're going to see a lot of innovation in this space, around use of like the wearables and things like that to help, again, access data from the patients more virtually and remotely too, right? In a much easier way as part of your day-to-day life.
And an integration of the protocol specified data points and the data points that are existing from our everyday lives, right? I mean, the traditional way would be that a trial would be ongoing. A patient would enroll, they'd have to go get an EKG for that trial. And then they'd see their doctor a few months later and they'd get an EKG. And those
another EKG, right?
would just sit there independently. Now people are realizing like, oh, maybe there's only one EKG that's necessary. It's less of a burden to our healthcare system and the patient. And so, that's just a really basic example of how we can really kind of leverage what's going on in that patient's everyday life into the data that's needed for the trial.
Yeah, one hopes that we can get to a point where we're a bit more efficient in all of the things that we do. It's kind of easy at our industry to point to things that are frustrating. I think of the image of my father at his computer yelling, "I just did that," and it asks them to do something again. And I think we probably do that from a healthcare perspective more often than we would genuinely like to.
Yeah, agreed. But it's going to be fun, right? I think there's a lot of progress that we can make, and I think we're going to get to a really fantastic place. So it's going to be a fun ride, that's for sure.
I hope so. I think one of the things that we come back to over and over again here is that I like the fact that we're listening to patients more. I think the ultimate beneficiary here, obviously is the patient at the end of the road. And we have a lot of people in our industry that are really relentlessly focused on that.
Yeah.
And again, we've now done, I think we've done close to 80 of these, and that comes up over and over and over again. And the big message really that we're left with is, regardless of who we're talking with or what the topic is, we always come back to patients, and we're reminded over and over again that we have a lot of really great people in this industry that are focused on making that better. So usually we would kind of kick it out and give you guys kind of the last word, but actually today I wanted to say one quick thing to close us out. Last week was actually a difficult week for a lot of people. Our friend David Schubert from the Accelerator Corporation passed away pretty suddenly, and he was one of probably the first people, I would say, along with Versant. Accelerator and Versant were the two funds that kind of put people on the ground in New York really, really early. And Dave meant a lot to a lot of people in New York. He certainly meant a lot to me, and we just wanted to remember him here on the program and say that we'll miss him. And last week was a tough week, but ultimately this field that we're in relies on the people that we talk to and work with to do a lot of great things. So I'll miss my friend, and thanks. Have a good day, everybody.
He was a great friend of Halloran's too. We're all going to miss him, so thank you.
We're glad to remember him and honoring him by having conversations like this, right?
Yep.
Certainly.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for being our guest.
Thank
we
you.
appreciate it.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for tuning in to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on NewYorkBIO, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.